It's Monday, the 24th of October. This is Politics Live, as Conservative MPs decide who they want to be the next Prime Minister. Joining me today, Conservative MP and Penny Mordaunt supporter Heather Wheeler, Shadow Leader of the House of Commons Thangham Debonair, Politico UK Editor Jack Blanchard and founder of Conservative Home and GB News contributor Tim Montgomery. Today, Rishi Sunak looks likely to become Prime Minister, but Penny Mordaunt is still holding out for the 100 MPs needed to make the ballot paper. Boris Johnson flew home overnight on Friday. He made calls on Saturday, but by Sunday he was out, leaving supporters high and dry.
I was absolutely flabbergasted. It's just one of those occasions where you just don't believe it's really happening.
Labour say there should be a general election.
We're supposed to be a democracy, and they can't just keep changing leader all the time and not go back for some kind of mandate.
Well, as we go on air today, Rishi Sunak, who lost out to Liz Truss just a few months ago to become leader, is now the firm favourite to become Conservative Party leader and the next Prime Minister. As we sit here in the studio, he has the support of 188 MPs. Backing him, Penny Mordaunt has 27 who have publicly declared. My opening question to everyone here is, will Rishi Sunak be named Prime Minister by the end of today? Heather.
I hope that the indicative vote will show that Penny has got a very good sounding amongst the MPs that vote today, and I hope that we go to the party membership.
And that means you're confident that Penny Mordaunt has 100 MPs backing her. We only have about an hour to go before the chair of the 1922 Committee of Conservative MPs is going to publicly declare who goes forward.
That's right, we need 102, and from where I'm sitting, I can see them in the bag.
Even though we only have 27 publicly declared, that's a lot of shy Conservative MPs.
There's a lot of very, very good colleagues, many of whom are very ambitious, and whoever becomes the next Prime Minister will be looking for people to fill jobs.
Is that credible, Tim?
I love Heather, but I'm not entirely convinced, I'm afraid. I think we will have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister later today. And one of my proudest achievements, perhaps I shouldn't admit this on national TV, but one of my proudest achievements in 2005, when I established Conservative Home, was to fight for members to continue to have a say in the leadership of the Conservative Party. But I think it's very important that the next Prime Minister has the consent and the support of the parliamentary party. It's clear that Rishi Sunak has the overwhelming support of his colleagues, and I think that should be the end of the story. We need to get on with quiet, stable, competent government, and I think Rishi Sunak becoming PM today delivers that.
Heather?
It's a private ballot. And you know the old saying about what Conservative MPs are like, or all MPs, when it comes to private ballots. You never know how they're going to vote.
But how can Penny Mordaunt become Prime Minister without the clear support of the majority of the Conservative Parliamentary Party? We saw what happened last time. Liz Truss didn't enjoy the support of the majority of Conservative MPs, and she lasted 5 weeks.
Well, at the moment, the rules are really simple. It's down to the members. This is an indicative vote. We will know by Friday, one way or the other.
Thangham? Will it be Rishi Sunak by the end of today?
I mean, it may be, and that's in the hands of Tory MPs, but I think whoever ends up as Prime Minister, whether it's the end of today or the end of the week, Tim says that we need a period of stability, of quiet calm. I can't see that happening. It's just changing the person at the top. We need a general election if we really want someone who's got a plan for this country and who understands what people are going for, and that's Keir Starmer. Will
Rishi Sunak be named as Prime Minister by the end of today?
Making predictions in UK politics is pretty much the daftest thing you can do, Joe, especially on national telly, so I won't be saying that, but it's certainly the most likely outcome. I mean, there's no doubt he has the overwhelming support of Tory MPs. The fact is he spent all summer telling Liz Truss why she shouldn't do what she was going to do, and he has been proven right about that. And so I think there are lots of Tory MPs who think that he now deserves a chance at running the country. I have to say, the idea of calm and stability at the top of government feels like something from a different era, doesn't it? I also have huge doubts that anybody could come in and run this Conservative Party in a calm and stable way.
Yes, and we'll talk about... Well, we'll talk about that in just a moment, and also, obviously, your calls for a general election. The European Research Group of Conservative MPs have been sort of gathering together, and we've heard this from Mark Francois, one of them. Let's have a listen.
We believe that we have one, and potentially two, extremely strong options to be leader of the Conservative Party, but as a group, we were unable to collectively endorse either candidate. However, some of us having spoken to both candidates, potential candidates this morning, they were equally adamant that they would take, if they became Prime Minister, a very robust line on the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Mark Francois, very clear there about priorities. Let's talk to the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young. First of all, just your response to what you heard there from Mark Francois in terms of them not acting as a group. We know that already because people like Steve Baker, one of their number, had already come out for Rishi Sunak yesterday.
Yeah, and I think that's very telling, isn't it? And that does give Rishi Sunak a massive boost, that he is managing to get support from a wing of the party that he might not have expected. And I think actually people like Steve Baker and Suella Braverman and others coming behind him has really demonstrated that he has got support from all wings of the party. And, you know, the thing that he is saying to people is that he is willing to bring in a cabinet of all the talent, something, of course, that his two predecessors didn't do, and which many Conservatives think led to a lot of the problems that there have been.
Right. I mean, we have Heather Wheeler here in the studio, who is backing Penny Mordaunt and is confident that Penny Mordaunt, despite only having 27 publicly declared nominations, is going to meet the threshold of 100.
Yep, and that's certainly what we're hearing from her team, that they feel that they are going to meet that threshold, that she would be able to enter the contest, if you like, and that she is very keen to take it to the party membership, because there are several Conservatives who think that it's important that the party, the foot soldiers, if you like, have a say. But of course, there's a counter argument to that, and it's about unity. That is the word we've heard so many times, isn't it, over the last few weeks, about the party putting together, because there are lots of MPs who are very aware of the damage that has been done, and many of them think that it can't be undone, but the damage that this has all been doing to the Conservative brand. And I think we've seen that actually. There's a tweet today, isn't there, from George Freeman, a former minister who has been backing Penny Mordaunt, really trying to make that point.
Let me just read that tweet since you mention it. George Freeman, to bring the stability and unity this country needs, the Conservative Party needs to unite behind a leader who can bring the different parts of the party together, assemble a cabinet of all the talents, win in 24 to keep SNP Labour alliance out. Penny Mordaunt is key to that. But he goes on to say the key question this morning is whether that unity and stability is best served by a contest this week amongst the grassroots members, or MPs putting differences aside and backing Rishi Sunak as the leader in waiting, with the economic gravitas overwhelming MP support to unite. So he's switched, has he?
He hasn't switched, no, but he is posing a question there about whether she is doing the right thing if she pursues this. Now, my understanding is that he does back her, and I think if she were to continue, then he would back her. But he is making the point there, and I think what we don't know is how many people privately are making this point to Penny Mordaunt, that, you know, she's maybe does have the support to carry on, but actually would it be better at this point for her, if it's on offer, to take a very high-profile job, bring the party together, and get a lot of kudos, if you like, for doing that, in order to try and, you know, end this contest today, if you like, and get on with all those tasks and all those challenges that the government now faces.
Well, Heather Wheeler, for the stability of the country, as we've just heard there from George Freeman, and for the party itself, why doesn't she just throw in the towel?
Because she is not the sort of person to throw in the towel. She believes in leading from the front. She also believes that we actually need a fresh face to take on all of these challenges. And she's absolutely got people from the left wing of the party and the right wing of the party as part of her core group. So there's no problem with her not having a cabinet and ministers from right the way across the party. And we do need that unity now. We really, really do. We need a fresh face, not somebody with fingers on the knife of getting rid of other people.
Ah, like Rishi Sunak, you mean. Vicky, just before you go, just take us briefly through what will happen in the next hour and onwards this afternoon.
Well, the first thing will be 2 o'clock when Graham Brady tells us whether there will indeed be 2 candidates or not. If there are going to be, then they go into private hustings with Tory MPs. Then there's this indicative vote, which is a vote which will is really designed to let the Tory party grassroots know what the parliamentary party, what MPs want, to try and avoid a situation where you have a Prime Minister who has not got the backing of the parliamentary party, because we can all understand how that can be incredibly difficult. I think actually it's going to be incredibly difficult, whoever wins this, to keep the party together.
Vicky Young, thank you very much. Come back and tell us any developments before the end of the programme, if they unfold. Heather Wheeler, you said in a radio interview yesterday you were convinced that the committee, this is the committee of backbench MPs, had set the threshold at 100 nominations to avoid Penny Mordaunt reaching the final 2. Is that because, you said, one of the gentlemen say to me, we can't have another woman, can we? And that's outrageous. So you think it was sexist reasons?
I think it was a stitch-up. I genuinely do. I mean, I'm sorry for my colleagues on the 22, but the reason why I say that is that they already knew that Rishi had 130 in the bag. So that made it a very, very high bar to make. And I appreciate why they did it. They didn't want 8 people jumping in, 5 people jumping in. And so 3 was fine. But you're already getting a third straight away now anyway.
And what do you make of that, Tim?
Well, a lot of course, Boris Johnson supporters think, and I think with some legitimacy, think the threshold was set to keep him out of the contest. And there were some people I was talking to on Friday who thought it should have been 120 to make absolutely sure, he couldn't get onto the ballot paper. But absolutely, the threshold was definitely done to keep the contest short. We couldn't have had a repeat of the summer. But I think there may have been some people on the 1922 who did want certain candidates excluded. So Heather isn't wrong to be suspicious.
If you can't get 100 Tory MPs to support you, you should not be the leader of the party.
True.
I mean, I think we've seen over the last few weeks how badly these things can play out. Right.
Well, I think we have an update, actually, from George Freeman in just a moment, but I'll come to that in a second. Let's have a look at what Boris Johnson said in his statement. In fact, he never actually said or confirmed he was running, but obviously we presumed he was going to. He said, "I believe I am well placed to deliver a Conservative victory in 2024, and tonight I can confirm that I have cleared the very high hurdle of 102 nominations, although again they weren't verified. There's a very good chance that I would be successful in the election with Conservative Party members and that I could indeed be back in Downing Street on Friday." He then went on to say, "But in the course of the last days, I have sadly come to the conclusion that this would simply not be the right thing to do. Though I have reached out to both Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt because I hope that we could come together in the national interest. We have sadly not been able to work out a way of doing this." What does all that mean, Jack?
You want me to translate?
Yes, please.
Boris speak to
I do,
you?
yeah.
I mean, so there's a couple of ways you can translate this, isn't it? Maybe he's completely on the level and he did have all these secret supporters, but he decided that it was for the good of the nation that he ducked out. Or alternatively, he didn't, but he wants to present to his fans and supporters that, yet, of course, he could have been Prime Minister and he can be Prime Minister any time he wants. Thank you very much. But for the good of the nation, or indeed, in his own mind, for the good of the nation, that it's best if he doesn't do it.
Well, he definitely had the supporters. Kay Starmer, Dee Abbott, T. Farron. They all wanted the return of Boris.
Absolutely not. I was completely horrified, actually, at the arrogance of someone who has done so much damage, who has treated the rules of this parliament, of the rules of this country, frankly, laws he set with such disdain, who is still under investigation by the Privileges Committee for alleged misleading the House or lying, whatever you want to call it, had the temerity to think think it was good for the country for him to re-enter the race. And I think that letter says its own story of what he thought of himself. It was all about him. I'm vexed that we spent the weekend talking about him, frankly. What we should be talking about is how we're going to help people who are worried sick about facing this winter.
And we're going to talk about that, I promise. Rishi Sunak tweeted this about Boris Johnson being magnanimous. He delivered Brexit and the great vaccine rollout. He led our country through some of the toughest challenges we've ever faced and then took on Putin and his barbaric war in Ukraine. We will always be grateful to him for that. But he then goes on to say, although he's decided not to run for PM again, I truly hope he continues to contribute to public life at home and abroad. Which do you think he'd like to go for?
Maybe just leave him in the Caribbean this time, I assume. I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, I think that line about, you know, we'll always be grateful to that, it sounded like a eulogy, didn't it? You know, like we'll never see him round here again. And I'm sure that's what most people in Rishi Sunak's team will hope will happen. But the idea of Boris Johnson going quietly into the night, of course, doesn't seem very credible.
It would be nice to think of Boris Johnson going to his constituency. I do wonder how the people of Uxbridge and South Ruislip feel about discovering that their MP, while we were all in Parliament last week, he was off having a jolly. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Well, how would you feel, and would you support the idea if Penny Mordaunt makes it to the final ballot, although it doesn't look likely as yet, but we're taking your word for it that the support is there, because she tweeted, Penny Mordaunt, in taking this difficult decision last night, Boris Johnson has put country before party and party before self. He worked to secure the mandate and the majority we now enjoy. We should put it to good use, and I know he will work with us to do so. Would she have him in a cabinet?
I think there is a role for Boris to play in the future. I genuinely do, because, you know, South Derbyshire is one of the old red wall seats. And, you know, we used to have 13 mines and coal mines and things like that. So, I mean, you know, my people work blooming hard and they appreciate somebody that lifts the country. And whatever Tangham thinks about Boris, Boris lifted the country. And that's what we now need from...
the rules, Heather. He broke the law.
Yeah, but he got an 80 majority in 2019 with a fabulous manifesto.
What does that say about how he thinks about the country?
Because, so that is what Penny is going to work on. She's already got James Hunt there as Chancellor, and we will have people from right the way across the party running the country.
Jack has rightly warned us about making predictions, so I probably shouldn't do this. But I don't think we've just seen Boris withdrawn from this race. I think it may be over for him now. Talking to Tory MPs last night who'd publicly backed him, partly staked their reputation on his return, and then at the last minute really to have the rug withdrawn, you know, from underneath them. They feel like almost like the poor bloody infantry going out of the trenches, and then Boris Johnson safely from behind suddenly saying it's all been pointless, and MPs are furious.
They'd had some warning he was like that.
Who knew?
Could have guessed he might betray.
He will struggle to get their support again.
Well, one of those who pledged his support in the Daily Telegraph yesterday, get ready for Boris 2.0, the man who will make the Tories and Britain great again. It's Nadeem Zahawi, former Chancellor and Cabinet Office Minister, fresher, stronger and more compassionate than before. He is the outstanding choice to lead our country through rough seas. Half an hour later, he said, a day is a long time in politics. Given today's news, it's clear that we should turn to Rishi Sunak to become our next Prime Minister. Rishi is immensely talented, will command a strong majority in the Parliamentary Conservative Party and will have my full support and loyalty. What were you saying about Tory MPs being taken to the top of the hill, march to the top of the hill?
Absolutely.
And you think it's more widespread then than perhaps is obvious?
Well, I probably spoke to a dozen Tory MPs in the last sort of few hours, last night, this morning, who backed Boris Johnson. 6 are very disappointed, half a dozen are sort of feeling really angry. And I don't think he will, if he's ever to get their support back, I don't think he will, actually. They feel completely misled. And because it isn't easy to back Boris Johnson. There's a lot of people who love him, but there's equal a number who hate him. And so they will have damaged themselves in the eyes of a lot of people by taking the stance they did.
But here we are again, still talking about somebody who is an ex-Prime Minister under investigation for failing to tell the truth, when what we should be focusing on, and what he should have been focusing on, and frankly, Heather, Penny and Rishi should be focusing on, is what's actually going to help the country. I've not heard a word of policy from either of them all weekend. On Laura Koonsberg yesterday, what I heard from Penny was constantly, well, I'm not going to answer that, I'm not going to answer that. out. And Rishi, we've not even heard him speak.
I mean, why didn't she set out a little bit more? She wasn't very forthcoming yesterday, being asked perfectly legitimate questions about her vision for the country.
So there's an op-ed in the Times today, there's an op-ed in the Telegraph today, so people can read that.
You can give us a flavour.
It's based on the 2019 manifesto, and it's based on Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. So people know.
Well, hang on, those two things are quite different, aren't they?
No, because
the difference is what Liz Truss talked about all the way through the summer, through the campaign. So it wasn't a shock to the markets that Liz was going to do what Liz was going to do. But what was a shock to the market was that the Prime Minister actually did what they said they were going to do. Now, that's the difference.
Without costing, and went further than even her own. Come on, Heather, you know perfectly well.
You can't have that.
Where was the Office for Budget Responsibility?
The problem, we've got the OBR and we've got the arrangements for Monday morning. That's why.
2 months too late.
Well, let me just...
Sorry, 2 weeks too late.
Let me just show you it's building support for Rishi Sunak publicly. Ian Duncan-Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party, former Cabinet Minister of Welfare. It is time for us to end the leadership contest and get a Prime Minister in place ASAP. I've reached the decision that senior experience at the heart of government matters most. To that end, I shall support Rishi Sunak. You still think that Penny Mordaunt's got 100 nominations?
I am very disappointed to hear that from Ian, because he glosses over the fact that Penny has got hugely more experience as a government minister than Rishi does. And I don't understand why the men do that.
Oh, goodness me.
It's not about sexism. Come on, Heather. It's about economic experience. At the moment, the economic issues are at the heart. And I've never been a big fan of Rishi Sunak, but he was Chancellor. He did contribute slightly to this difficult predicament that he bequeathed his successor, but he has experience, and I think that's why people like Ian Duncan-Smith are coming in behind him. It's why I'm coming in behind him. We need to end the soap opera that we've put the country through over recent times.
Well, it'll either be ended by 9 p.m. tonight or it'll be ended by Friday.
So, George Freeman, the update I mentioned a little bit earlier. In interest of unity and stability, better to do a deal now. A deal with Rishi Sunak, perhaps for her to become Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary. Come to unity ticket, he says, maybe Deputy PM, emphasising she's still a good candidate. Is it something you consider and that she should consider at this point?
No, it'll either be over by 9 p.m. tonight or by Friday.
Let's talk about the general election that Labour is calling for. Nadine Dorries, former supporter, sorry, she's still a supporter, but I was going to say formerly of the Boris Johnson government. Boris would have won members' vote, already had a mandate from the people. She's talking about 2019. Rishi and Penny, despite requests from Boris, refused to unite, which would have made governing utterly impossible. Penny actually asked him to step aside for her. It will now be impossible to avoid a general election. Why would a Conservative MP want a general election now when the polls are really pointing to them being decimated by Labour?
There's a handful. Christopher Chope is another. But simply, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And I think the opinion poll leads are enough to frighten every Tory MP to rejecting the call from Labour MPs for a general election. And actually, we were elected for 5 years as Conservatives. And the thing we owe our country now is to actually stabilise markets, show that we are still capable of competent management of the country's affairs. And at the end of that period, it may not be enough to save the Conservative Party in government, but it'll save a lot of seats and it will potentially save the Conservative Party's reputation. And I don't think, actually, a lot of people want a general election because they're angry with the Conservatives at the moment. But if we put them through 3 or 4 weeks of campaigning just at this moment, when actually the most important thing is to give market stability, I think those calls for the general election would be sort of revisited quite quickly.
Jack?
I mean, I think that's the argument you'll hear from Tory MPs. I don't really believe there's going to be a general election anytime soon for that exact reason. Why would they do it? And they don't have to. I mean, you can make a moral case for, and it certainly looks, speaking to colleagues who work for Politico in other countries, they think it's completely insane that we can keep swapping prime ministers. And they're like, why aren't you guys having an election? I'm like, well, this is how Britain works. But it is how Britain works. It is up to the governing party. They do command a majority in the House most of the time, and therefore they can decide. And I would assume that the new prime minister will leave it it for as long as humanly possible before they get to an election, because they know that the chances are they'll probably get thrown out then.
We could have avoided the weeks and weeks of campaigning that went on over the summer if we'd had a general election when Boris Johnson stood down. We could have avoided some of the chaos of people really worried sick about how they're going to get through the winter with their energy bills if the possibly new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had taken Labour's suggestion earlier this year about how to fund the help for people with their bills. There's so many things we could do to provide that stability that Tim's mentioned. And the key one here, I'm afraid, 3 weeks of a general election compared to the last 6, 8, 9 weeks we've had, even just the last 3 weeks since the mini budget, which I seem to remember was called something else at the time. If only we had a general election in those 3 weeks, we could have had a calm, stable government that was focused on what's best for this country and helping people get through very tough times. And that would be with Keir Starmer in number 10. We could have had that by now.
Let's talk to Faye Jones, Conservative MP. She's in Central Lobby. She's supporting Rishi Sunak. Welcome to you, Faye. First of all, should Rishi Sunak have done a deal with Boris Johnson?
Well, I don't think there is any reason for a deal, or there was a reason for a deal between Rishi and Boris. It's clear that Rishi has a really quite large, almost overwhelming number of supporters in Parliament. So I don't think that made any sense. Rishi is keen to speak to as many colleagues as possible today to make sure that he comes out on top in the ballots later this afternoon. So no, I don't think there was any need for a deal.
Do you think Penny Mordaunt should throw in the towel now, given that she's got 27 publicly declared supporters and the threshold is 100?
Well, that's a question for Penny and her team. I know some of her supporters are urging her to consider that. I am a massive fan of Penny. I think she is fantastic. I would like to see her serving in a Sunak cabinet, but it's up to her to make that decision if she wants to go ahead.
We've been talking here about, or saying we would talk about the realities facing the country, the economic realities facing the country. Let's have a look at the borrowing forecasts. After the mini budget, this is the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Faye, I'll just take you through it along with our viewers. You know, £190 billion of borrowing, 22-23. It's still at around 100 to 114 billion by 26-27. This is what the new Prime Minister faces. You're hoping it's going to be Rishi Sunak. How are you going to tackle it?
Well, that's why I'm supporting Rishi, because I think he's been clear all the way along on the economy. He was tested quite a lot during the membership election earlier this year. So I think he's the right person to hit the ground running. He's been innovative when he was Chancellor. That furlough scheme that he implemented saved 11,000 jobs in my constituency alone. So that's why I think Rishi is the right person to steer us through these really difficult times. And you know, he is not going to sugarcoat things or promise anybody the moon on a stick. He's very realistic about the challenges that he's facing, and that's why we need him as Prime Minister.
Right, and just to confirm, is your understanding that Jeremy Hunt would stay as Chancellor and we will have that economic statement on October the 31st?
I believe so. I mean, I'm not. I've got no reason to believe that that isn't the case.
Right.
Jeremy has been clear that he is coming back to the House on the 31st with a statement. I've got no reason to believe that's changed.
Right, and you're right. He was tested during the leadership campaign, but of course things have changed, haven't they, Faye, since the mini budget? That's why I brought you those figures, just to underline how serious it is. So we are going to have higher taxes and severe spending cuts in order for Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister to balance the books.
I don't know. We're going to see from a new Chancellor.
Well, that's what Jeremy
next
Hunt
week.
has said. From a new Chancellor, did you say?
No, sorry. We're going to see from a new administration next week. One way or another, we will be under new management by the end of this week. So we will need to see that statement next Monday to find out. But again, Rishi is very clear that we do have some really tough choices to make. We're in the midst of a very difficult economic climate because of a number of global factors.
And because of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget.
But we are going to now have to look at some really difficult spending decisions. I think we're being clear about that. But that's why I think Rishi is the right person to be able to steer us through those times, because he did it during COVID, and I'm absolutely confident he can do it again.
I mean, one of the pledges was spending 3% of national income, GDP, on defence spending. He didn't commit to that during the leadership contest. Should he now?
Well, I wasn't in the room when he was asked that question this morning. I'm not a member of the ERG. But from when he was asked that question during the leadership election, Rishi made it very clear he would provide whatever it takes to support the UK Armed Forces as they support Ukraine or whatever challenge we might be facing at home and abroad. So again, that is the kind of clarity and honesty that you can expect from Rishi Sunak.
Well, that's not clarity, is it, to say he'll do whatever it takes unless he puts a figure on it. 3% is very specific. That's what's been pledged, but he wouldn't, should he?
Well, again, you know, it has to be done in discussion with the Chancellor. You know, it's not something that you can't make these commitments during this leadership election campaign that we're having when the Chancellor is coming to the House in just a matter of days with an updated fiscal statement. So I would want Rishi and Jeremy to be working together to provide exactly whatever it takes for the UK Armed Forces.
I mean, one of the things, obviously, that Rishi Sunak made clear, it was very much a differentiating point to Liz Truss, was about national insurance rise. Obviously, it was proposed by him. Liz Truss got rid of it. It's been through legislation. Should he bring that back, that levy, to pay for the pandemic fallout and also the health and social care levy?
Well, as well as not being able to pack Rishi's cabinet, I don't think I should be writing his budget for him either. I think we need to...
But that's quite an important thing, and you're a supporter. So is that something that is important in terms of you backing Rishi Sunak, that he goes back to that increase in national insurance contributions in order to pay for the backlog in the NHS?
That passed the House last week, passed the House of Commons, and is going through its stages at the other end
want to see him
later
reverse
this
it?
week. What I think is really important is that we provide stability, clarity,
Right.
and I can't write a budget on behalf of a Prime Minister who is not in place yet.
And the money that was going to go from those national insurance contributions, would you still like to see that money at least go into the NHS and the health and social care levy? And if so, how would that be paid for?
Again, I would love to be Chancellor, Joe, but I really am not. And I'm not going to audition for it today. You know, what's important is that we have a Prime Minister in place who is able to provide market reassurance, and that can only be Rishi Sunak.
Well, I'll just pause there, if you can stay with us. Thangham, let's have a look at this. Faisal Islam, the BBC economics editor. UK government bond yields, 5, 10 and 30-year, they all tumble, as you can see there from the graph, by a significant amount on market opening, well below 4%. 10-year went as low as 3.8%. As markets react to ex-Prime Minister Johnson no longer being in the leadership contest after getting 60 public supporters. And is it also because, as we've just heard there from Faye Jones, that they might be expecting stability with Rishi Sunak?
Stability would be fantastic. I speak to businesses in my constituency, Bristol West, all the time, and the one thing they're asking me for at the moment is stability. It's not been there now for months. And whatever happens today, that's a very small snapshot in the turmoil that's happened in the markets over the last few weeks and months. Moody's, the credit rating agency, only on Friday moved us from stable to negative. That's not gone away. We still need to see a plan, and I don't believe that any of the Tory leadership candidates, past or present, has got that plan or that understanding of what people are going through at the moment. The pensioner who knows their pension is not going to cover their heating bills. The working family who are not managing to pay for the childcare. That's what's at issue here, and I don't hear any of them talking about that.
All right, let's just play you this, Faye. I hope you can hear it. It's Mervyn King, former Bank of England governor, talking to Laura Kuenssberg yesterday. Let's hear what he had to say.
The challenge is, if we want European levels of welfare payments and public spending, you cannot finance that with American levels of tax rates. So we may need to confront the need to have, significantly higher taxes on the average person. There isn't enough money there amongst the rich.
Mervyn King there. Faye, do you agree with him? Higher taxes on a lot more people.
Well, I caught bits of it dropped out there, but I think I saw him on Laura Kuenssberg yesterday. We are frank that there are difficult challenges ahead, and I'm a Conservative, I'm a low-tax Conservative. I want to see people keep hold of their money, which is what Rishi did with things like the universal credit uprating. So, there is a track record there. He's been clear about the ambition, but right now we have some really tricky problems to solve, and that does mean making some difficult decisions if we have to.
Faye Jones, thank you very much. Heather, can I get you to respond? Do you agree with Mervyn King? If we want to have the sort of standards of spending on public services as they have in many parts of Europe, we can't also have low taxation rates as they do in the United States. Which will it be for you?
Well, I'm a bit of a nerd, and I've looked at the OBR forecasts over a number of years. The last OBR forecast was 40% out. So they may.
So you don't believe
Well,
any of the forecasts or the predictions. So, all right. So what's your prediction? What's your prediction?
Well, I'm not a great statistician. It took me 4 years to pass my statistics exam, but I plugged away at it and got there in the end. What I found really interesting is if you look back at the OBR forecast and actually the IFS as well, they just plain got it wrong.
All right.
So what I'm looking for is growth in the economy, which we are seeing. I know it's a bumpy ride at the minute.
Where are we seeing growth in the economy?
Well, certainly South Derbyshire. My unemployment is way, way, way down.
It's not the same as growth, though, Heather,
because
is it?
they're taking people on because they're selling stuff, they're making stuff. That's what we do in South Derbyshire.
And they can't pay their bills. They can't pay their mortgages. This was an avoidable crisis that was made in Downing Street. It was made in Downing Street by the previous administration, and the backdrop to that was the one before that.
Who do you want to be ruled by? Do you want to be ruled by the markets? Oh, well,
No,
fine. Thank you very much. Or do you want to be ruled by the Prime Minister?
Who understands, and I think trashing the economic institutions like the OBR and the Bank of England, which plenty of Tory MPs are doing at the moment, is deeply
am I actually wrong that their forecasts are wrong?
Do we want
am I actually wrong, Tanya? Are you going to tell me that they got them right?
Because
they didn't.
All right, hang on. Don't talk over each other. But just firstly, you say it was all made in Downing Street, but there are global headwinds. You must admit that. You will face the same £100 or so billion of borrowing to deal with if you were to win an election when it comes along. And it is down to the COVID pandemic, the fallout from that to some extent, and the Ukraine war, exacerbated, I think most people would agree, by that mini budget. But not all of it was done by that.
And that's the avoidable crisis.
Right,
but it's the one that sent people's mortgage rates skyrocketing, and that was avoidable because by the previous Chancellor announcing a mini budget without a plan for how he's going to pay for it, that sent gilts going.
But let's have a look at the current. Let's have a look at the
going.
current situation, because the point from Mervyn King is that we're not going to be able to balance the books, get the money in from the rich at the top of the income scale. Do you agree with him on that?
Well, we could make a start. We could abolish the non-dom tax status, which would bring in 3.2 billion that would help us with our workforce problem in the NHS. We could start there.
Right. Well, do you agree with that?
I think that's a very difficult and glib reaction to it.
I can give you more.
Yes, I'm sure you can, Tanya. I mean, we look forward to you on a Thursday morning doing your shadow leader stuff. But and long may you stay there, dear boy, dear girl. But you know.
Oh, Heather.
But has Mervyn King got a point that actually perhaps there needs to be some honesty from the politicians, any of them, be it Labour or Conservative, about the choices that are going to have to be made, and that we can't straddle these two: high amounts of spending on public services and low rates of taxation, relatively speaking.
He's right, but there are other ways of addressing it than just changing the tax and spending levels. And can I make a defence of Liz Truss in one narrow respect? If I was a spin doctor looking for any way to justify or look back on her time in office with positivity, one thing she might have done is put Britain's low long-term growth performance on the agenda. Britain has become a sluggish economy.
Under Conservative
Rachel
governments.
Reeves has talked about it as well. It's not just
12 years.
But somehow we need to think of what are the long-term things that we need to tackle. House building, absolutely one of them. The reason why the poorest people in Britain, this is something that the Centre for Social Justice think tank I'm involved in focuses on. The reason why a lot of the lowest income people in Britain are struggling is because housing costs are such a bigger proportion of their income than people in France or Germany. It's house building, it's investment in the family. The reason why the state has grown so big is partly because the family in Britain is so weak. It is unable to look after its own members in the same way. The Conservative Party, the Labour Party, neither of them ever talk about sort of supporting the family.
Yeah, we do.
Actually, we
Well,
do.
we hardly do.
All
We
right,
talk
well,
about childcare, but we don't really talk about the family. They're different issues. And someone who wants to lead Britain and wants to tackle our growth performance will start addressing those big issues.
I think they're all really interesting points, Joe, but it just goes back to what a difficult job the new Prime Minister, potentially Rishi Sunak, is going to have. He needs to raise taxes. Loads of Tory MPs won't want him to. He's going to have to slash spending. Labour and the public won't want him to. You're right, he needs to do house building. Loads of Tory MPs won't want him to do that
Absolutely.
either. This is an unruly Parliament he's going to be taking over. And, you know, good luck to him or whoever it is who becomes Prime Minister, because they're going to face the exact same challenges of getting all these difficult things through that Liz Truss faced and Boris Johnson faced before her.
Right, and you claim then, as you have on this programme, Thangham, that you can actually get enough money from the richest in the UK without increases in general taxation.
I think it's going to be difficult. Now, it's avoidably worse because of that mini budget that was announced those few weeks ago. So ideally, we wouldn't be starting from here, but unfortunately, we are going to. So every single penny in our manifesto will be costed. Rachel Reeves is a very tough taskmaster there. We have a strong set of fiscal rules, which is that we will borrow to invest in our future, to grow our economy, but we will not do that for day-to-day spending. I think that's the right approach, and I want to see that from any government. And at the moment, you know, we talk about sort of not taking care of the family or building homes. If only there'd been Tory governments for the last 12 years that could have done something about that, and they didn't, which is why we need a general election.
And neither did the Labour government
why we need a general election.
Certain issues that we don't
problems.
talk about because we've become a short-term political culture. And that's true of all parties. And
yet we had 2.5% average growth under a Labour government throughout the entire 13 years, and we've had 1.6 under Tory governments over the last 12. That tells its own tale.
And that's almost true all across the world. So it's not just...
I just want to play you this. Guy Hans, who's the founder, chair and chief investment officer of private equity firm Terra Firma, long-time supporter of the Conservative Party. He was speaking on the BBC's Today programme, funnily enough, today, and he was asked if he thought the Conservative Party is fit to run the country and can attract investment at the moment. Let's have a listen.
No, to be quite blunt. I think it's got to move on from fighting its own internal wars and actually focus on what needs to be done in the economy and omitting some of the mistakes they've made in the last 6 years, which have frankly put this country on a path to be the sick man of Europe.
Is it time to apologise for mistakes that have been made?
Well, certainly Liz has done that. And I think she was
he was referring to before her as well.
To do that. It's been a very, very difficult time. I mean, one of the things that you do when you're putting up a budget is that you fly kites, you roll the pitch beforehand. She just couldn't do that. When we had 10 days of mourning because of losing our dear Queen, she couldn't roll the pitch. Everything came to a complete stop. The markets knew what she was going to do from the summer, but she couldn't get out there. She couldn't have the meetings with people in the city and things like that. And it was just... The timing was just horrendous.
Right, sick man of Europe, says Guy Hans. Thangham, how would Labour sort that out?
Well, we would start by dealing with the immediate crisis. We would make sure that we were expanding the support given to people with their gas. No, by increasing the windfall tax on the massive windfall profits made by oil and gas, so that we could help people with their bills. And then we would deal with the medium and the long term. And now we need a government that's prepared to look at the medium and long term.
You do know that they're paying taxes already, don't you?
And in order to do that, yes, I do. And I do know that windfall profits mean windfall profits, and that would help us to pay people's bills this winter. But I think it's really extraordinary.
You were going to do 6 months
we're not
anyway,
going to do,
and we're doing 6 months.
We're not going to.
What's the difference?
This government is not investing in renewable energy, in the wind, the onshore wind, which I believe Rishi Sunak's still busy ruling out, the offshore wind, the tidal, the solar, the nuclear that we need in order to power our future and bring those good jobs.
Hang on.
Bring those good jobs to all the parts of the nations and regions of this country who are being left behind at the moment.
We haven't got that long left on the programme. George Freeman, as we know, is now urging Penny Mordaunt to back Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is on 192, well over half of the parliamentary party. Penny Mordaunt still on 27. There is George Freeman tweeting again, clearly keen for Penny to fold. Penny Mordaunt is a huge force for conservatism with the life story, vision and courage to help lead a conservative revival. I'm proud to support her, but given the urgent need for conservative stability and unity this week, I'm urging her to join and back Rishi Sunak today. Should she?
We'll have a Prime Minister at 9 o'clock or by Friday.
Tim, what do you think is going to happen in what's going to be just over half an hour? Graham Brady is going to have to verify all these nominations.
I really hope Penny does fold, even if she has the 100 MPs, because we cannot have a Prime Minister who only has the confidence of about a third of Conservative MPs. It's very clear that if it was a narrow sort of successive numbers inside the parliamentary party, I can understand going for the members to decide. But when it's so overwhelmingly in favour of one candidate, Penny Mordaunt is a great person, a great Conservative, but she should now do the best for the party and the country and say it's time for Rishi Sunak to become Prime Minister today.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I'm still trying not to make predictions, but it's pretty obvious it's moving in one direction, isn't it? It would be pretty crazy for Penny Mordaunt to try and lead the country in this crisis with so few of her MPs apparently behind her. It's very hard to see that happening. I assume she's holding out to get herself a big job, and why not? But I think, you know, the argument that we just need to get on with this. I'm sure most people in the country will be watching yet another political crisis in Westminster of the government's own making, going, will you just sort it out now? And I'm sure lots of Tories are conscious that that's what people will be thinking.
Well, and let our viewers know the timings, because we're coming up to 1 o'clock as we go off air. What can people expect?
Well, they've probably got time to go and make a cup of tea and a sandwich, and then they can return to their screens in about 45 minutes when the man of the moment, our sort of anointed person who anoints Prime Ministers...
Becoming a household name, isn't he?
Graham Brady, never mind the electorate. Graham Brady can tell us who our new Prime Minister is likely to be.
Well, this is where you heard it first from Jack Blanchard. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you to all of our guests, and of course I'll be back tomorrow with more politics, certainly live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Bye-bye.
Ja, spoiler alert. Rishi Sunak gewoon. Ja. Oh well. Die staat up for me. See you tomorrow. Hey. Hang on then, if he's Prime Minister, will he be doing Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday?